The Outsider. In 2016, while Hollywood was recycling worn-out formulas, South Korea released a masterpiece that most Western audiences never saw. The Wailing is one of those movies that starts off calm and slowly becomes disturbing. The story takes place in Gokcheong, a remote village in the mountains of South Korea, where the arrival of a mysterious Japanese man coincides with a series of violent and unexplained events. Ordinary people start acting aggressively, lose their minds, and attack their own families for no apparent reason. At the center of it all is Yong-gu, a clumsy police officer who seems completely unprepared to deal with something supernatural. When his daughter Hyo-jin begins showing frightening behavior, the case stops being just professional and becomes personal. Fear grows as rumors spread through the village, including reports of a man with red eyes wandering through the forest and disturbing scenes involving dead animals. Desperate for answers, Yong-gu crosses paths with Moo Myung, an enigmatic young woman who claims the stranger is not human, but an evil entity. At the same time, contradictory evidence appears, blurring the line between victim and villain even more. A shaman named Il Guang is called in to perform rituals that promise to drive out the evil, while parallel investigations reveal personal belongings of the victims kept as trophies. As Hyo-jin's condition gets worse, the movie dives into paranoia, doubt, and impossible choices. Every character seems to be hiding something, and the viewer is never sure who is telling the truth. What starts off light ends up bringing scenes at this level. Dark Impulse. Piercing is a movie centered on Reed, a seemingly ordinary man who just became a father and struggles with violent urges that come out of nowhere. He isn't introduced as a classic monster, but as someone desperately trying to control what's going on inside his own head. Right at the beginning, Reed stares at his baby daughter while holding an ice pick, locked in a disturbing internal battle. He manages to hold back in that moment, but starts believing he needs to direct that violent desire towards someone else, as if that would somehow protect his own family. The solution he comes up with is planned down to the smallest detail: a hotel, a prostitute, and a crime he believes he can carry out without leaving any trace. When he gets to the room, Reed rehearses every step, wipes down surfaces, writes down timings, and tests methods as if he were preparing for an important presentation. Everything seems to be under his control until Jackie shows up, a woman completely different from what he expected. She's unpredictable, provocative, and clearly carries her own strange impulses. The dynamic between them quickly turns into a psychological game where it's never clear who's actually in control. From that point on, the movie becomes a duel of intentions. Conversations filled with double meanings, uncomfortable situations, and sudden shifts in power slowly make Reed lose his footing. He starts questioning not only his plans, but whether he really understands the person standing in front of him. Distorted Mind. The house that Jack built follows Jack, a failed architect from the state of Washington who narrates his own story while talking to an enigmatic man named Verge. This conversation works as the thread connecting a series of episodes that show how Jack sees his crimes not as violence, but as creative expression. It all starts in an almost banal way. Jack offers to help a woman with a flat tire, but the encounter quickly turns tense. Her constant teasing triggers his anger. That moment marks the beginning of a string of murders that he starts storing in an industrial freezer inside an abandoned factory. This place becomes an important symbol of Jack's obsession with control and organization. As time goes on, he gets involved in increasingly risky situations. One of his crimes almost goes wrong because of his obsessive-compulsive disorder, which makes him compulsively clean every single detail of the scene. For Jack, small events start taking on bigger meaning, as if the universe were validating his actions. That feeds his confidence and pushes him to toy with the police and the media. The narrative also shows his personal relationships, always marked by abuse, manipulation, and a false sense of intimacy. Jack talks too much, trusts too much, and still seems to always be one step ahead. Everything keeps building up like pieces of a bigger project, something he insists on calling his final work. Strange friendship. In Creep, what starts as a simple side gig quickly turns into something deeply uncomfortable. The story follows Aaron, a broke videographer who accepts an apparently harmless online job. He needs to travel to an isolated cabin in Crestline of California to film a day in the life of Joseph, an eccentric man who claims he has an incurable brain tumor and wants to leave a video message for his unborn son. From their first meeting, Joseph clearly isn't ordinary. He talks too much, invades personal space, and steers intimate situations in a way that leaves Aaron visibly uneasy. Imagine being in the same house as a guy who does this out of nowhere.
Hello, my name is Peach Fuzz. I might look like I eat you up.
The video's original emotional tone quickly drifts into something unsettling. Small details like poorly told stories and sudden mood swings start raising doubts about who Joseph really is. As the day goes on, his behavior becomes more erratic. The isolation of the cabin, the lack of signal, and the psychological game Joseph creates make everything more tense by the minute. Creep builds its horror on discomfort and doubt, making the viewer question everything. And well, the ending is one of those no one sees coming. The Cursed Legacy. The Brood follows Frank Carveth, a father trying to protect his daughter daughter while dealing with a bitter battle against his ex-wife, Nola, an emotionally unstable woman under the care of a highly unconventional therapist. Nola is a patient of Dr. Hal Raglan, a psychiatrist known for an experimental method called psychoplasmics, in which repressed emotional trauma physically manifests in the body. During the sessions, old childhood wounds resurface, involving abuse, neglect, and a deep anger that was never resolved. At the same time, Frank begins noticing strange signs in his daughter after visits with her mother, which only increases his suspicion. Meanwhile, brutal and unexplained murders begin happening, always connected to people from Nola's past. The deaths are at this level here, making the police and the press start paying close attention to the case. Frank, increasingly suspicious, begins investigating on his own and discovers that Raglan's treatment may be going far beyond what's acceptable. The movie's atmosphere is constantly suffocating. Isolated medical institutions, silent children, deformed bodies, and family arguments create a disturbing tone from beginning to end. Nothing feels completely safe, not even family bonds. Rural nightmare. In Eden Lake, Jenny and Steve are an ordinary couple who decide to spend a few days away from the city at a remote lake in the English countryside. The idea is to relax, enjoy nature, and escape daily stress. But, well, that's not what happens. On the way there, small conversations reveal Steve's frustration with the lack of boundaries and responsibility among some teenagers, a detail that gains weight as the story unfolds. The peaceful setting is shattered when a group of loud teenagers starts hanging around the area. Led by Brett, an aggressive and intimidating young man, they begin provoking the couple more and more. What seems like simple rudeness evolves into vandalism and open threats, creating a constant sense of tension. Every attempt at dialogue only makes things worse. When their belongings disappear and the feeling of isolation grows, Jenny and Steve realize they're trapped in a dangerous game. The forest around the lake, once peaceful, turns into a hostile maze where no one seems willing to help. The movie builds its violence in a raw and distressing way, and without a doubt deserves to be watched. The mysterious body. Right from the opening scenes of the autopsy of Jane Doe, the atmosphere already makes it clear that something is very wrong. The police find several brutally murdered bodies inside an ordinary house, with no signs of forced entry and clear marks that the victims tried to escape. In the basement, one detail stands out: the intact body of an unknown woman, partially buried, without identification, and without any apparent injuries. That's Jane Doe. She is taken to an isolated morgue where Tommy Tilden, an experienced coroner, works with his son Austin, who ends up postponing personal plans to help his father. From that point on, the movie unfolds almost entirely inside that claustrophobic space, turning a simple autopsy into something increasingly disturbing. As the examination progresses, impossible contradictions appear. The body seems both recent and ancient at the same time. Each new discovery raises more questions than answers, and the sense that that woman is hiding a secret grows by the minute. The environment starts reacting in strange ways. Unexplained sounds, electrical failures, and subtle apparitions make the fear leave the metal table and spread throughout the entire building. Skepticism turns into paranoia, and isolation becomes just as frightening as the corpse itself. The autopsy of Jane Doe plays with the viewer's curiosity, delivering fragmented clues about who that woman may have been and what really happened to her, along with a few jump scares. Dark Innocence. In Alice, Sweet Alice, what awaits you is uncomfortable psychological horror, filled with suspicion, religious guilt, and a constant feeling that something is very wrong. The story takes place in the early 1960s and follows a family marked by tragedies that are hard to explain. Catherine Spages is a divorced mother raising her two daughters alone, Karen and Alice, both students at a strict Catholic school. While Karen excitedly prepares for her first communion, Alice shows strange behavior, aggressive attitudes, and a quiet jealousy over the attention her sister receives. Small provocations between the two create an uneasy atmosphere right from the start, especially when Halloween masks enter the picture. The horror explodes in shocking fashion when a brutal crime happens inside the church itself, turning a religious ceremony into a nightmare. From that moment on, the town sinks into paranoia, and the main suspect becomes Alice herself. Her history of disturbing behavior makes police officers, family members, and even people close to her start looking at her with fear. While the detective in charge tries to piece together the puzzle, Karen's father decides to investigate on his own, entering dangerous places and dealing with increasingly strange figures. At the same time, violent attacks continue happening, always involving someone wearing a mask and heavy religious symbolism. The movie constantly plays with doubt. Could Alice really be capable of something so monstrous? Or is someone using faith, guilt, and fanaticism as a weapon? Dark Memory. In The Taking of Deborah Logan, the audience already goes in expecting a tense mockumentary, the kind that starts calm and ends completely out of control. The story follows Mia Hu and her small team of film students, who decide to document the daily life of Deborah Logan, an elderly woman diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Alongside her daughter Sarah, Deborah lives a seemingly quiet life, perfect for the intimate footage the group is looking for. At first, everything seems to follow the pattern of a degenerative disease. Forgetfulness, mood swings, and small lapses in awareness are explained by Deborah's doctor as normal symptoms of an aggressive case of Alzheimer's. Even so, the camera starts capturing moments that are too strange to ignore. Empty stares, unsettling nighttime episodes, and behaviors that don't match simple confusion put the team on edge. Luis, the cameraman, is the first to suspect that something is wrong. The more the group investigates, the more sinister connections appear, involving a missing doctor, past crimes, and occult practices that seem to have been buried for decades. The situation worsens when Deborah's behavior becomes dangerous, putting not only the crew but also people around her at risk. While part of the group quits the project, Mia and Sarah keep going, trying to understand whether they're dealing with an extreme illness or something much older and more evil. The movie also has a scene that stayed in everyone's mind. The film builds its horror by mixing memory loss, guilt, and the supernatural, making the viewer constantly question where the disease ends and where something impossible to explain begins. Cursed Eclipse. In Verónica, the horror begins in an unsettling way, with a desperate call to the police made by a panicked teenage girl. Without explaining much, she screams that something is coming to get her brother. Right after that, the story goes back a few days and takes us to the working-class neighborhood of Vallecas in Madrid in the early 1990s. Verónica is a 15-year-old girl carrying far too much responsibility for her age. With her father dead and her mother always working, she takes care of her 3 younger siblings on her own. The heavy routine, adolescence, and grief create a fragile emotional ground that the movie uses very well to build tension from the very first minutes. Everything changes on the day of a solar eclipse when a seemingly ordinary class sparks the girls' curiosity about ancient rituals and the spirit world. Driven by curiosity and unresolved pain, Verónica and her friends decide to mess with something they clearly don't understand. The seance takes place in a stuffy, dark space filled with bad omens, and it quickly spirals out of control. From then on, the family's apartment turns into a suffocating space. Strange sounds, shadows, moving objects, unexplained marks become part of their daily lives. The most disturbing part is that the danger always seems to circle around the children, increasing Verónica's sense of urgency and desperation.
Papa?
Unlike many films in the genre, Verónica builds a growing, intimate, and emotional kind of horror, Lake Mungo. In Lake Mungo, everything begins with the sudden disappearance of Alice Palmer, a 16-year-old girl who vanishes during a family outing. After the tragedy, the family tries to move on, but the house starts being filled with unexplained noises, strange marks on the younger son's body, and the constant feeling that Alice is still there. Each family member grieves in a different way, and it's exactly that emotional fragility that makes everything even more disturbing. The movie develops its mystery through photos, home videos, and interviews, creating an almost documentary-like atmosphere. Little by little, clues emerge that Alice was hiding deep fears and experiences that no one around her seemed to notice while she was still alive. Without relying on visual exaggeration, Lake Mungo leans into subtle psychological horror. Destiny Watches. In the 2012 film Resolution, the story follows Michael Danube, a graphic designer living an ordinary life with his pregnant wife, until he receives a strange email from his best friend, Chris Daniels. In the video, Chris appears isolated in a remote cabin, clearly out of control, saying nonsensical things and acting as if he's being manipulated by something invisible. Worried and driven by guilt for having abandoned his friend in the past, Michael decides to go there to try to help him. When he arrives, he finds Chris aggressive, paranoid, and resistant to any kind of help. What should have been just an intervention between friends starts spiraling when small details stop making sense. Photographs appear out of nowhere, objects seem deliberately placed, and the videos show more than they should. Everything about the place gives off the feeling that someone or something is watching their every move. While Michael tries to keep control of the situation and save his friend, strange local figures appear along with old stories tied to that isolated land. It's another bizarre movie for anyone who wants something outside the usual. Forbidden Light. In the 2019 film The Lighthouse, the audience can expect suffocating, strange, psychological horror filled with symbolism, the kind that messes with your head. The story takes place at the end of the 19th century and follows Ephraim Winslow, a newly hired worker assigned to tend a lighthouse on an isolated island in New England. He arrives to spend just 4 weeks working alongside Thomas Wake, a grumpy old sailor who runs everything. From the very first day, it's clear there is no partnership there. Wake assigns humiliating tasks, controls the routine, and keeps the biggest secret of the place all to himself, the lighthouse light. Trapped on that patch of land surrounded by the sea, Winslow begins to realize something is wrong. Time seems to warp, strange visions appear, the ocean seems to watch his every move, and the lighthouse becomes a forbidden obsession. The more he tries to understand his companion and his own past, the more reality begins to fragment. With constant storms, uncontrolled drinking, and rising tension, the two men's coexistence turns into a dangerous mix of confrontation and dependence. The movie builds a heavy atmosphere, full of mythology, superstition, and disturbing imagery that might keep you up at night, and when the story moves toward its end, fate demands its price in a cruel and symbolic way. The Lighthouse is one of those movies that doesn't explain everything, but gets inside your mind and leaves you with one last image that's impossible to forget. Cursed camera. In One Cut of the Dead from 2017, what you can expect is a horror movie that starts like a low-budget zombie B-movie and, without warning, turns into something much more creative, chaotic, and surprising. The story begins by following the filming of True Fear, an ultra-low-budget zombie movie being shot inside an abandoned water treatment facility. Director Higurashi is desperate for a hit and decides to go all in. To make the scenes more realistic, he chooses to use a ritual connected to the site's cursed past, believing it will bring real zombies back to life, and it actually works. When the crew realizes the undead are real, panic spreads. While some try to escape, others lock themselves inside the building. But Higurashi sees the perfect opportunity to create the most authentic film ever made. He forces the actors to keep performing even with real danger around them, turning the set into a true improvised hell. Between unexpected attacks, suspicions, and extreme decisions, the characters start dropping one by one. No one knows who's infected, who's still human, or who's going to be next to die. The tension rises especially as the story approaches the end, and an inevitable confrontation happens right in front of the camera. But One Cut of the Dead doesn't settle for being just another zombie movie. Just when you think you've figured everything out, the narrative completely flips, revealing what was really going on behind that insane shoot. On the screen, there's a video where we show horror movies that break the fourth wall to scare you. Click and watch. I'll see you there.